Thank you, Nate. So let's move on to the Fall 1 data submission requirements and processes. So for Fall 1, the Fall 1 comprises of the student profile data. So these are the basic file types that you are expected to submit to CalPads for Fall 1. In the center is your student enrollment record file, which enables you to gain ownership of a student and generate an SSID for a student. So this is the base file type that you are expected to submit to CalPads to gain ownership. Now, after you've acquired ownership of a student or generated an SSID, you are expected to submit the SINF, SILA, SPRG files, which are extracted from your SIS. This comprises your student demographics information, the student English language acquisition status, and any categorical programs that the student is eligible in. And then after that, depending on whether a student is a special ed student, you are also expected to submit the student with disability status file, plan, meet, and serve record for a student. There are times when an existing student already has a student with disability file, and so you may just be expected to submit a plan, meet, or serve record. So you guys have to be aware of that. So again, you need the SCNR file to submit all of the supporting records in CalPads. Just bear in mind, just because this is just the start of the year, and so you are establishing the student profile of the student for this current academic year. Any changes, any updates throughout the year, you will need to update those records um, in Fall 1, Fall 2, or even in end of year submission for the specific students. And now, of course, after you've submitted your Fall 1 student profile, you've certified that profile will, as I mentioned, will continuously be updated throughout the year with additional supporting documentation, right? Supporting data. You have for Fall 2, all of the courses that the student is enrolled in, and then in end of year, any program participation, any absent summary, the courses the student completes if they are in high school or in departmentalized courses, and also the student with disability records. Bear in mind that in this new year, some of these end of year submissions will be consolidated into one submission. So essentially, end of year 2, 3, and 4 will become end of year 1, and course completion would be end of year 2. So that's just looking ahead, but just do know that once you've established your Fall 1 student profile data, you are expected to religiously maintain any updates relevant to the student data in CalPads. So now that we've discussed the different file types that you are expected to establish or post in CalPads for each of the students, uh, these file types will then be aggregated in different Fall1 subgroups that will be part of the collection process that will be submitted to CalPAS, to the state, as well as to the federal reporting. So first and foremost, let's first see how the sources of data are mapped based on the different information that's being collected. So you have your active enrollments, which is essentially your student enrollment file. This is where you report your currently active students for this new academic year as of census day. You also have any dropouts, any completers in the prior academic year that is still reported or collected by the state as part of the Fall 1 submission on the state level. And then, of course, you have your different data points. One is gate, homeless, tribal foster youth, and partly the data elements in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. So all of this in light green will come from your student program file. And then, of course, you have your student information file that where you source out your Title III eligible immigrant students. And also the student information file is where the parent ed level education is collected from, which determines if a student's parents are not high school graduates, which qualifies them under the socioeconomically disadvantaged status. Then, of course, we have our English learner students through the student English language acquisition file. This is where we determine if a student is TBD, EO, EL. This is also where a student may be determined to be tested. So this is your English learners as well as your ADEL status. So all of those will emanate from your ELS file. And then of course you have your data points that are collected based on a matching process with the California Department of Social Services as well as the Human Health Services. So you have your direct certification, your migrant education. This is basically match with a state matching process that collects any eligible migrant student based on their migrant student information number. So this match with the CalPADS data is matched with the migrant ed database, and so and will be reflected based on a report or an extract. Then, of course, you have your foster youth, which is matched and generated through your foster reports. And sometimes you can also do a manual match if you believe that the student is eligible for foster youth but hasn't been matched in CalPADS yet.
Hey, Kyron,
Yeah.
which data comes from the student information system and what data comes from CalPADS needs to be put in the student information system?
So for the student information system, in the context of the socioeconomically disadvantaged status, you need to have your parent level education. We understand that this is not a required field in your student information file now. However, if you have data that qualifies the student to be part of the socioeconomically disadvantaged, meaning if the parent ed level that the student reported or the parent reported show that the parents are not a high school graduate, then those should be updated in the student information file to qualify for socioeconomically disadvantaged status. Also, for the Title III eligible immigrant, you have the birth country and the 3-year cumulative indicator in the SINF, and that will be discussed in detail in a future slide in this session.
I was thinking more along the lines of the gate, homeless, tribal, so youth, the SED, the Title III, and the English language are going to be sourced from the student information system, while the expectation is that LEAs take the direct cert matches, the migrant ed matches, and the foster youth match from
Okay.
CalPADS and then update their
So,
information systems. That's all I was.
oh, okay.
That's what I was thinking. We don't clearly identify that in the color coding.
Okay. All right. So this slide outlines the three major student subgroups collected in Fall 1. You have your SED, socioeconomically disadvantaged, which I just explained in the prior slide. So this comprises the data elements that makes a student eligible for SED. You also have your LCFF, which is the for the local control funding formula. It shares most of the same categories as SED, but also includes English learner as a distinct reporting group. And then, of course, you have your free reduced price meal definition. So any student who is a 181, 182, migrant ed, homeless, foster youth, direct cert, tribal foster youth, are automatically counted or eligible for free or reduced price meal. So the key takeaway here is that while these subgroups overlap significantly, there are certain unique criteria like the parent ed level and English learner for LCFF that are important for accurate reporting and funding calculations. So let's see the sources of your free and reduced price meal subgroup. So although your free and reduced price meal subgroup is automatically defined based on your program 182 and 181 record, there are different sources that qualify them for that 181 and 182 record. So here is the slide that defines that. So you have your when a student is determined to be homeless or was matched as a migrant ed student, matched through the direct certification, or was determined to be foster youth or tribal foster youth, that automatically makes them eligible for a 181 record. Okay. You only have a 182 if the direct cert came back with a medical reduced status, 182. So all of this would automatically qualify the student as a 181 free. So if you know that the student is a 181 is qualified based on any of this, then they are automatically reported to for with a 181 record. Now, of course, if the students are not eligible for any of this, they may still be eligible based on the income eligibility form that the student may need to fill out at the start of the year, or if the student or an alternative income form if the student is in a school that is in a CEP or Provision 2-3 school. Then, of course, if the student is part of a school that is a Provision 2-3 or CP school and they're not in their base year, then, of course, those students' eligibility will roll over from one year to another, starting from the base year if the student is still actively enrolled at that school. So again, color coded. So a student may qualify for 181 or 182 based on the income eligibility form that the student need to fill out or based on other categorical programs and data matching process. Also, in the context of the fall one reporting, any student whose NSLP application is date stamped on or before October 31st of any academic year and turns out to be eligible later on will be part of the 181, 182 eligibility record. So this slide explains the eligibility date requirements for including students in the LCFF report when their enrollment overlaps fall 1 census day. You have your homeless students qualify if they have an open SPRG record with a start date on or before census day. You have your migrant ed students that are matched. So if any migrant student was actively matched as of census date, they are included on the report. You also have your alternative income eligibility form, which includes regular NSL, regular school, CEP, and Provision 2-3. Must have an NSLP program start date on or before October 31st. Then for foster youth, must be active on census day according to state matching in ODS report 5.7. And then you also have your tribal foster youth. It follows the same SPRG start date rules as homeless, which is as of census day. And then you have your direct certification based on eligibility such as SNAP, TANF, and medical, free or reduced. And the student must be certified for direct cert between July 2nd up to November 2nd of the academic year. And then you have your EL and ADEL status, which require a SILA record with an EL or ADEL on or before census day. The key point here again is that each eligibility type has its own required source and date window to ensure inclusion in the LCFF. And then this guide just provides you the different sources or collection methods with regards to your FRPM application. So you have your NSLP application, which is basically the standard counting and claiming for claiming schools for provision to schools. Then you have your universal benefits application. So this is just an additional application form should the student also want to qualify for the universal benefits or Sunbox program. And then you have your alternative income form, which is used for incoming student outside of the base year for any schools that are under the CEP or Provision 2-3 schools program. So here are some reporting nuances, as I've mentioned earlier, with regards to what is being collected in Fall 1. So again, number one, just a takeaway here is that if a student was eligible in CalPADS last year based on direct certification or NSLP application, that eligibility should not be reported this year as an based on their 30 days carryover. Do not report the 30-day carryover as an eligibility of a student in CalPADS for this new academic year. You only submit an SPRG record of 181 or 182 when you've determined the student is eligible based on their income eligibility form, their inclusion in the CEP or Provision 2-3 status of the school, or if they are still eligible based on the categorical programs that they have been reported last year. So bottom line is do not automatically submit students who were eligible last year based on the 30-day carryover as eligible for free or reduced lunch. And then make sure that all of any forms, NSLP, UBA, or alternative income form must be submitted and date stamped on or before 10/31 to be included in the eligibility for LCFF. With regards to federal funding, I believe program report 1.1 will only include students whose program 181 and 182 record has a start date on or before census day. So be aware of that. So again, here's just a list of the different categorical programs that are included in Fall 1. So you have your free and reduced price meal based on your 181, 182s. Gate will still be collected. Homeless students will be reported. Any students who are participating in the language instruction program must be reported. And then, of course, your tribal foster youth students. So this table also provides you the start and end dates you will use should you report the students. And then, of course, end dates would be based on when the student lost their eligibility for that specific program. Right, so we have our Title 1 Part C migrant matching. So in prior years, your Title 1 migrant students were reported in CalPADS based on using the student program 135 record. And this is based on local determination of the student, whether the student is a migrant ed or not, based on their MSID, eligibility, start and end dates. However, starting this year, we've made it easier for LEAs to determine if a student is migrant ed or not by conducting a matching process between the CalPAS data and the Federal Migrant Ed database. So to determine if a student is migrant, you just have to download the migrant extract from CalPADS and then import that into your SIS. So the migrant ed extract can be downloaded by going to extracts, clicking on ODS extracts, and you would have your migrant eligible program students download extract. So just indicate whether you want to just download your active students or download students who were migrant eligible based on the date range. So for additional information on this migrant process, you can go to the CalPAD user manual, go to functionality map, extracts, and click on the maps process. So you have here the process of downloading the file and some additional resources relevant to the migrant ed program and the flash that discusses the change in the migrant ed student data collection at the bottom here. All right, so bottom line is if a student was matched as migrant ed on or before census day. Then and that student is actively enrolled on or before census day in this current academic year, they are included in the migrant eligibility category. All right, another matching process would be your foster youth. Again, not all foster youth students are included in are categorized as or eligible as foster youth in the local control funding formula. So any foster youth based on this placement, so if you have students who are in the pre-placement, post-placement, permanent placement, supported transition, and voluntary placement, those are considered foster youth in the definition of CalPAS. So any actively enrolled student at your district who were matched and based on any of these categories will then be considered foster youth. And that foster youth match would be reflected on reports 5.6 up to 5.9. Okay. Um, Alternatively, you can also do a local foster match directly into CalPads. So if for some reason 5.7 doesn't show the student as a foster match, considering they met the categories here, then you will need to do a local foster match process. So to do that, you just have to go again to CalPads. You can do manual matching by going to online maintenance and clicking on local foster match. So you just have to identify the SSID and one or two information, either the case ID or the client ID, and then do a search. So a tutorial for that is also available in the CalPad user manual. Just go to online maintenance from functionality map and then click on local foster match maintenance. So we have this information here.
I think what's also important about the foster youth, Kyron, is that schools and LEAs provide services to foster students that go beyond the purposes of LCFF. In terms of CalPADS and reporting, we're collecting students that are eligible for LCFF. And so the LCFF FAQs helps explain. This is also in the data guide who is eligible for LCFF as a foster youth and who isn't. So you will have a number of kids that you've identified as foster youth students, and they're not going to be eligible for LCFF. And so um, this webpage here will help you find that information, who is eligible and who is not.
So just to reiterate the definition for the foster youth as per local control funding formula eligibility, you can just go to the LCFF FAQ and then go to unduplicated students, and then based here you would be able to determine who does CalPAS and the LCFF consider a foster youth student. And so this would be the basis of the matching. So any student who are not under any of these criteria will not be considered foster youth in CalPAS. And so they won't be matched as a foster youth in CalPAS.
Scroll down just a bit, Kyron, and it will specifically say who is not considered foster youth under the LCFF FAQ, right there in the middle.
There you go. Who is not considered foster youth under LCFF. So you have your child or youth who is living with relatives or friends and who is not a dependent of the court, and a child or youth who is a ward of the juvenile court pursuant to a petition filed under WIC section 602. So this explicitly states who are not eligible, and then the one above are the ones who are eligible. So this is a clear definition of who will be included in the foster youth matching in CalPETS. Thank you, Nate. All right. We also have the Title III eligible immigrant. These are LAs are required to submit student information to CalPADS for Title III eligible immigrant. And from this data, the CD determines eligibility for ESA Title eligible immigrant student program. So from your SINF, the definition of an eligible immigrant that qualifies to this subgroup is that if a student was not born in any of the 50 states, Washington, D.C., or Puerto Rico, and has been in the U.S. schools for 3 full cumulative academic years as indicated by the U.S. schools 3-year cumulative enrollment yes no indicator in CalPADS. If it's a yes, then and the age is between 3 to 12, then they automatically qualify to be considered Title III eligible immigrant. So the question here is any student whose birth country is outside of the 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, and has the U.S. schools 3-year cumulative enrollment equal to yes, and the age is between 3 to 12, they qualify. So that includes any student whose parents may be part of, the military or diplomatic corps, was stationed in different countries and the student was born in that country, then they automatically qualify as a Title III eligible immigrant. All right, the last one would be your student with disabilities. So the Fall 1 collection of student with disability data is crucial for federal reporting. It is used to meet requirements under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or IDEA, including EDFACS and State Performance Plan, Annual Performance Report indicators. So the data for students with disabilities is also used for monitoring and accountability to determine if the student is continuously receiving services or their eligibility is continuously updated. So data from SWDS file, the plan, the meet, and the serve directly impacts NLA's annual monitoring determinations and federal accountability indicators for, again, disproportionality and in identification, any primary disability, and program settings. So timely data is important, and so it is important that you continuously update any of the plan, the meet, and the SWDS and serve records. That way, students are identified properly in CalPADS. And with that, it also bears in mind the impact of disproportionality. Nate, do you want to
Yeah, I'll
say
jump
something
in.
on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, so disproportionality is a more complicated way of saying overrepresentation. And so it's a measure of the general ed and the appearance of students with disabilities compared to in comparisons of their race, ethnicity, or it's a comparison of students with disabilities and their discipline compared to those of general ed. And so it's a way of disproportionality is a way of potentially identifying unfair treatment of students with disabilities or other ethnic groups or other student subgroups. So as far as disproportionality in terms of students with disabilities, CalPADS will contribute information, the disproportionality identification in special education, disproportionality identification in special education, specifically with the specific disability category of those students who are identified as students with disabilities is one group of those students are the African American students identified significantly more frequently for death of hard of hearing or mental intellectual disability, one of those categories than their other counterparts. And then number four, more restrictive environments are the subgroups within the student disability population in more restrictive environments. So are Hispanic students in more restrictive environment or are they allowed to be in general ed with their other students with disability counterparts? And then disciplinary action, that's going to be from end of year, not fall one. But that is, again, another measure of disproportionality. Again, are the students with disability being disciplined or subject to discipline more frequently or more severely than their general education counterparts?